Hello, everyone. So, I want to talk to you guys about how people underestimate evil. People do this all the time. They see something that is insidious, and they think, oh, those people are just in the fringe. They're just lunatics. No one's going to listen to them. And you look at history, and you look at the organization that is the most mentioned when talking about evil, the Nazi Party. And you see how people underestimated the Nazis. They were people who really believed that Adolf Hitler was just a maniacal buffoon who would not get anywhere. They thought that he was just some primitive, ape-like man. I mean, they didn't really believe that he was an ape, but people would make fun of him. And people would say things like, oh, he's just some buffoon, moron, babbling monkey, or something like that. And he's not going to get anywhere. And people make this mistake all the time. People make this mistake all the time, and they think, oh, no, that's not going to happen. Oh, it couldn't happen here. But just look at history. And if there's one thing that we learn from history, it's that people do not learn from history. So this is the problem with people. The problem with people is that they tend to underestimate things that they do not understand. They tend to underestimate things that have not yet tested themselves. They will see some sort of a cult or some sort of an organization, and they'll think to themselves, oh, these people are harmless lunatics. Who cares? Just look at history, and you will see that we should never underestimate evil entities, because they may just get big enough to become dangerous. And if you look at the Nazi Party, if you look at how they rose to power, you'll notice that they sort of fluctuated. They ebbed and flowed in popularity. They slowly gained votes. They slowly gained fans and popularity. But they would ebb and flow. They would fluctuate. So sometimes they would win big. And then they would have their shortcomings. They would have their failures. And so people would think, okay, they're harmless, right? So, for example, on July 30th of 1932, the Nazis won big with 37% of the vote. I mean, that's massive. To gain 37% of the vote of a nation, that's always a big deal. Always. It's always a big deal. That's always significant. And so the Nazis really dominated the political sphere. But nonetheless, there were moments when they lost popularity. There were moments when they wouldn't win as big as a prior election. There were moments when conservatives, other right-wingers would get huge increases in votes, and the communists were getting popularity. And so this is one of the reasons why people thought, okay, the Nazis aren't that big of a deal. So, for example, on December 4th of 1932, the Nazi vote dropped in communal elections in the province of Thuringia, and the Nazis lost up to 35% of their previous support in towns like Weimar. So they were actually at one point in 1932, and this was after they won big. This was after they won 37% of the German vote. The Nazis dropped in popularity in Thuringia. And so people thought, okay, they're losing steam. They're going to just die off. This is what a lot of people thought. So, for example, you had these intellectuals who believed that the Nazis weren't really that big of a deal. One of them was Harold Lasky. Lasky was a left-wing British scholar of the London School of Economics, and he predicted that Nazism would die and that Hitler would end up in a Bavarian village drinking beer and reminiscing on the good old days when he almost had his Reich. And then there was the liberal publication, and forgive me if I butcher the German language, but the name of this publication was Vossische Zeitung, and they published an article that stated, quote, "The nimbus of constant success has vanished. Mass propaganda has lost its sensational appeal. The most superlative promises fall on deaf ears. The recovery of health can commence." And they were saying this in regards to the Nazis having a decline in popularity. So there were people who thought Nazis aren't a big deal. Now, they were people who were astute enough to believe and to predict that the Nazis were definitely going to be dangerous and were definitely going to be genocidal. One of these people was Pier van Passen. Van Passen was a Dutch journalist who, in fact, interviewed Adolf Hitler before Hitler took power. And during the interview, Hitler yelled at Van Passen, telling him, "How could you, as a Dutchman, sympathize with European Jewry? How can you, as someone who is Dutch, someone who was a part of the Aryan race, sympathize with the Jews?" So, from this conversation, Van Passen was intuitive enough to know that Hitler was going to take power and that he was going to genocide the Jews. And people didn't believe him. And Passen went to America. He went to this major synagogue in New York City. I believe it was in New York City. And he warned the Jewish people in the synagogue that Hitler was going to take power and that he was going to kill the Jews. And what did a wealthy Jewish man tell him? He said, "Young man, Germany will always be Germany. Civilization will always be civilization. The Germans are not going to become Nazis. They're not going to murder the Jews. You are dead wrong." Well, who was wrong at the end of the day? It was that wealthy Jewish man in the synagogue. And so if you look at the rise of Hitler and how he took power, it was also, to a great extent, due to people underestimating him. So, for example, today I was reading about how Hitler became chancellor, how he took power as the chancellor. And you had this guy, his name was Franz von Poppin. And Franz von Poppin was a nationalist. He was very jingoistic, and he had ideas of grandeur. He wanted to rule over Germany as a dictator. He wanted to make Germany into a despotic, ultra-nationalistic regime. And there was another guy by the name of Kurt von Schleicher. Kurt von Schleicher was a military commander from the First World War, and he liked von Papen. He liked Van Papen because Van Papen was a patriot, and so he saw Van Papen as someone who was very selfless, someone who was willing to give his life for the fatherland. And so von Papen eventually became the chancellor. He had tyrannical aspirations, and Kurt von Schleicher saw that, and he said, well, this guy is becoming a little too tyrannical. He has tyrannical aspirations. And so he eventually got some of the other government officials to turn against von Papen, and von Papen had to resign. So Papen never forgot this. He felt the sting of betrayal from Schleicher, and so he made a conspiracy with Adolf Hitler. And he saw in the Nazis basically what he wanted for Germany, right? To a great extent, what he wanted for Germany. He saw in the Nazis ultranationalism, right-wing politics, a thirst for blood, and a thirst for totalitarian power. And so he wanted to see the Nazis in the government. But he didn't want them to get so far ahead in power that he would not be the ruler. So he convinced this other guy named Hindenburg to support Adolf Hitler and to appoint Hitler to be the chancellor. And that's what happened. Hitler became the chancellor. And von Papen believed that he could control Hitler. He believed that he could use the Nazis to establish his anti-democratic, anti-constitutional, anti-Weimar sentiment. And in the meanwhile, he believed that he could control the Nazis. He believed that he could contain them. And look at how that turned out. It didn't work out. But again, Poppin underestimated Hitler. He underestimated the willpower of Adolf Hitler and the astuteness of Hitler. Hitler knew exactly what von Papen had in mind when he supported him, and Hitler was not going to fall for it. Remember that Adolf Hitler was an intelligence officer before he got into politics. And not a lot of people talk about this. Not a lot of people talk about the fact that Adolf Hitler was actually an intelligence officer after World War I. People don't talk about this. People say, oh, he was just some struggling, starving artist whose artwork was continuously rejected. He was broke. He was kind of homeless at one point in time. He hated his father, blah, 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 blah. They describe Hitler like he's some sort of quiet mass shooter. You know, he's the quiet nerd who secretly reads Nietzsche and loves Hitler and then ends up shooting up the school. I mean, Hitler was kind of like that, but he was more intelligent than that. Hitler eventually, after World War I, he would eventually become an intelligence officer, and he was assigned to infiltrate the National Socialist Party. And he infiltrated the party that would eventually become the Nazi Party. And he was there on assignment, and he liked what he was hearing. He liked the party. And he was so conniving, and he was so good with words, and he was so charismatic that he took over the whole party. He took over the whole damn thing. He took over the party. And then he used that party as a vehicle to take power. People think that he was just some blabbering buffoon. No, he was very charismatic. He knew exactly how to talk to people. He knew how to manipulate the masses. He knew how to boost up the morale of the people. He knew what angered the population. And he gained enough popularity to take power. He gained so much popularity that the other conservatives in German politics knew that in order to succeed, they had to work with the Nazis. They had to. There was no way that you could have succeeded in politics unless you worked with the Nazis. And a lot of people fell for Hitler because there was a lot of evil things that the leftists were doing. There were a lot of evil things that the communists were doing. And so they saw Hitler as a savior against communism. That's why a lot of people support Adolf Hitler. And I want to read to you guys an example of what I mean. There was a lot of terrorism that was going on in Germany after World War I. Germany was kind of, in a way, it was kind of like the Wild West. I mean, there was law, but there was also a lot of lawlessness. There was a lot of people breaking the law, and you had street battles between Nazis and communists, and it was ugly. It was very ugly. And you had, imagine you are an American living in the 1920s and early 1930s, before the Nazis took power, and you're reading the newspaper, and you're reading about how communists in Germany have shot at police officers, how they have murdered police officers, how they have snipers on a building and they're shooting at cops, how they blocked a road and then opened fire on people. Imagine that you are an American reading the newspaper and you're reading these stories. You would be thinking, oh my goodness, these communists in Germany, they have gotten out of hand. They're murdering people. They're doing acts of terrorism. They are doing horrendous acts of lawlessness. They are agents of the Soviet Union. They want Germany to be a territory of the Soviet Union. And then imagine to yourself that you, as this American living in the 20s and early 30s, seeing Hitler, you would be thinking, the German people are absolutely right to vote for that guy. You know damn well that's exactly how you would be thinking. A lot of us would be thinking that. Because you see this sort of thing today. You see ultranationalist parties in Europe receiving praise from Americans on the internet. And the praise from these Americans goes something like this. Oh my goodness, the Europeans have to vote for these parties. Why? Because the left is getting out of hand. That's pretty much what was happening before Hitler took power. And I'll read to you guys some examples of this terrorism. So it talks about how the communists at one point blocked a road and opened fire on people. And it says here that the communists staged a decoy demonstration to lure the police away, then blocked the police station exit with a heavy chain, and formed a crowd in front of the pub. There was a pub where these Nazis like to hang out. 4 or 5 gunmen fired about 20 rounds into the building, wounding 4 people as well as the publican who died 3 hours later from a bullet in the head. The assassins were spirited away to the Soviet Union. So there you go. Soviet agents opening fire on people, blocking police vehicles, blocking the police, committing acts of terrorism. There's another example here, and this is a case of serious terrorism that took place. So it says here that police attempts to impose order in communist-dominated areas met rooftop snipers. So imagine, you're living in the 20s and 30s and you're reading the newspaper and you're reading about how communists who were Soviet agents had snipers on a roof shooting at cops. And it says here, ordinary policemen were frequently assassinated. In August 1931, in Berlin, 3 policemen were murdered outside the Babylon Cinema near the Bulowplatz. The murders had been planned by the KPD Politburo. And so there you have it. And that's just 2 examples. There were many examples like this that were going on. And this is why people supported the Nazis. This is one of the biggest reasons why the people supported the Nazis. And so the reason why I'm saying this is because I want people to understand how evil works. Evil looks at other evils to justify its existence. Evil people do this all the time. You see this, just watch any sort of criminal interrogation where a criminal is justifying his actions. Criminals will say things like, well, other people do it. Criminals will say things like, well, if I don't do it, then someone else is going to do it anyway. Criminals always find excuses. They will point to other evils to justify their existence, to justify their evil actions. And the Nazis pointed to the communists and they said, well, we have to kill these commies. And when Hitler was conspiring to take the position of chancellor, he met with a very wealthy banker. His name was, I think his name was von Schroeder, something like that. And Hitler told this banker, I want to take power and I want to purge Germany of all of the Social Democrats who were, at one point, after World War I, the Social Democrats were the dominating political power in Germany. But that, they got eclipsed by the Nazis eventually. But Hitler said that I want to take over Germany and I want to purge Germany of Social Democrats, communists, and Jews. And that's what happened after the Nazis took power. And there were communists who were trying to do communist revolutions within Germany. And a number of them were Jews. And so the Nazis pointed to this and said, look, the Jews are trying to push communism. They're trying to push degeneracy in our country. We have to purge Germany of them. And that's how evil works. And people fall for it. And the reason why people fall for these sorts of evil organizations is because these evil organizations always claim that they are trying to remove another evil. They always say, you have to trust us, you have to support us, or else these other evil people are going to torment you, and they're going to victimize you, and they're going to tyrannize you. And so people support that particular evil organization to remove and to prevent the advancement of another evil. And this is how it works. And if you don't understand this, then you're going to fall for an evil organization's pretexts and justifications. That's just how it works. And people fall for it all the time because they don't really look into history seriously. And I think one of the reasons why people don't look into history seriously is because they want certain things to be true. They want for certain things to be true. It's kind of like those people who praise the Aztecs. They don't really want to get into the history of the Aztecs and all the human sacrifice because there's something about the Aztecs that they like, right? There's something about the Aztecs that just tickles their brains and gets them all excited. And they don't really care to even look at the actual history. And if someone actually brings up the real history, they don't want to listen to it. God says, my people are destroyed from a lack of knowledge. If you go into I want to say in the book of Proverbs, in the first chapter of Proverbs, I think it says something like, because you hated knowledge and you ended up suffering because of that, the Lord will laugh at you, something like that. And that's pretty much what happens. That's pretty much what happens. People underestimate evil, and they laugh at it, or they undermine its significance. And they will say, well, it's not really a big deal, and nothing's going to happen. And people think that what they are accustomed to is always going to be the status quo. They always think, well, it's always been this way, so it's always going to be this way. And it never works that way. I mean, just look at history. Just look at today. How many empires have fallen? How many regimes have fallen? How many ideologies have died? How many times do we see certain trends come and go? It happens all the time. This is just a part of human existence. But people want to sit here and pretend as if the status quo is always going to be the status quo, and that is not the case, because it has never been the case. People radicalize themselves. They destroy the world with their radicalism, and then people realize that we shouldn't do that anymore, so we go into a period of calm, and then we go back into radicalism because we either forget history, we become indifferent to it, or there is some sort of evil that worries us to the point where we have to support another evil group to destroy the evil that is worrying us. And that is that's the deception that people fall for. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.